Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. One of the most interesting comments to come from promoter Frank Warren after Nathan Gorman's win over Kamil Sokolowski is that a fight between Gorman and stablemate Daniel Dubois could happen at the back end of 2019. But not only that, he believes it has the potential to be in a stadium and sell 30 or 40,000 tickets. Yes, he really said that. And my feeling on that is it's a massively optimistic prediction from Frank Warren there. I think, at this stage, being able to build to that level of fight in just a year's time, don't know if it's really realistic. The reality is both have a lot more work to do before they can headline an event that draws in tens of thousands of fans. That fight needs a lot more building, a lot more marinating. I know we hate fights marinating, but that one has barely got the marinade on it at the moment, and especially if they want to get it to the level that Frank Warren is talking about. In Gorman, we've got a guy who's clearly on the rise, garnering more buzz in 2018, but he is still one of these guys who's largely unknown outside hardcore boxing fans. And with this Sokolowski fight that he's just won, and while it was broadcast on BT Sport, Gorman only did enough to cruise to a points win, and that was because he had an injured hand early in the fight. He was protecting that hand, just doing enough just to get the win. And if you were watching him for the first time, if you're a casual boxing fan catching the show, you might have thought, well, what is all the fuss about? It wasn't the sort of performance that was going to sort of grab headlines, going to be an eye-catching performance. It wouldn't have really won him any new fans. He did enough to win, no more. Although it must be said, he does deserve a lot of credit for being able to largely control Sokolowski with one hand effectively being out of commission for power punches. At this point, he is no easy beat, and he's proven if someone isn't up to the task, he'll beat them. He recently dominated the previously unbeaten prospect Naylor Ball. So after the fight, Ricky Hatton described Gorman as basically, because of the hand injury, going through the motions, and he was a bit dejected after hurting that hand. And Gorman himself, he rated that performance as a 2 out of 10. And clearly he wasn't really happy with how it all went, but he said a win was a win. So there's certainly an argument to say off the back of that performance, albeit one in which he was hampered by injury but did enough to win, that some of that sort of growing hype that's sort of been surrounding him and coming in behind him would have just potentially leveled off a bit after that performance. But then again, one good performance, it can start changing that again. Boxing is certainly like that. You're only as good as your last performance, as they say. Or the one I prefer, the saying, rooster today, feather duster tomorrow. And Gorman's rival, Daniel Dubois, he was in a sort of similar situation after his most recent fight. He was taking the distance for the first time against Kevin Johnson. And while that was a lopsided fight in which Dubois dominated and Kevin Johnson barely threw a punch, it didn't end in that explosive knockout that many fans were wanting or expecting. And until that point, Dubois had been riding a wave of hype on the back of early stoppages and sparring stories. And when he didn't get the expected knockout that many fans wanted, a lot of fans were quick to lay into him, sort of calling him a hype job, just because he didn't knock Kevin Johnson out. And there were some who were even saying that he'd never be able to beat Anthony Joshua based on that particular performance against Johnson, who Joshua had knocked out in a few rounds. In my view, this sort of rush to dismiss him as a complete hype job, it really isn't fair. Dubois is just 21. He's had very little amateur experience. He's learning on the job as a pro. The guy needs rounds. He needs experience. And not every fight is going to end in a knockout. It just doesn't happen. Even Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder, they've both been taken the distance once in their careers. But the Johnson fight, it did prove Dubois has a ways to go. He is definitely a work in progress. He needs more rounds. He needs more tests. He needs to be able to change things up when the plan isn't working. Because arguably, if you saw the first couple of rounds of that Johnson fight, you effectively saw the whole 10 rounds, because it was all the same. He could have probably invested more to the body and Johnson tried to break him down that way, but You know, Johnson was extremely negative, didn't really give Dubois a lot of chance to look good, but Dubois, he could have made some other adjustments, but hindsight, as they say, 2020. And I'm sure if Dubois was to fight Johnson again next week, he'd beat him more convincingly. Dubois had even said that immediately after the fight, and I think he would. But, you know, would we really want to see that fight again? Kevin Johnson, geez, barely threw a punt. It wasn't a great fight. I think he probably needs a handful more fights against durable opponents like Johnson. Hopefully they'd show a bit more ambition than Johnson did. Even a guy like Kamil Sokolowski would be a good opponent for him. You know, someone tough, rugged, they're going to come to fight, show some ambition, and you can get some experience from those guys before truly stepping up. He needs more seasoning. That much is clear, because if he's rushed too soon, it could well derail a promising career. And that's part of the reason I think it's too early for a Gorman fight, even in a year's time. Say between now and then, what's he going to have, another 4 fights or so? He won't be ready for it. He's just too green right now. He needs more time and many more rounds under his belt. I know a lot of fans do want to see that fight as soon as possible. I just don't think Dubois is ready for it. Whereas you look at Gorman, he is more polished. And he still does need more polish, but he's more of a finished product than Dubois is. He's just a bit more advanced than Dubois in certain areas, and certainly he's got more experience than the very green 21-year-old. And he was able to demonstrate in that Sokolowski fight that he could adjust in the fight, in ring, and when he was thrown a curveball like that hand injury. So that was a very good performance when you sort of look at it in that light. But in terms of filling out a stadium with 30 or 40,000 people for a Gorman and Dubois fight, that feels more than a year away. I wouldn't have thought even in a year that they'd have nearly a big enough followings to draw anything close to that. Some casuals, they might be aware of Dubois thanks to some of the Anthony Joshua sparring stories that recently did the rounds, but you know, they'll really, both guys will need to crush it in their next several fights to really build up enough interest to have a stadium fight of any consequence. I think the back end of 2020 is more realistic, but even then, it's really, this is a time thing. They need to establish themselves as top contenders. And right now, they're just prospects. And Daniel Dubois is probably still going to be a prospect in a year's time. In a year's time, that's just, you know, it's just too soon for what Frank Warren is talking about. But if they do fight in 2019, I could see an event of 5,000 to 10,000 people. Realistically, you know, they're both young. The loser, they could rebuild. They'll still have a very good career, most likely. And it is a fight I want to see, don't get me wrong. But in terms of building to a 30 or 40,000 seat seller, it's going to be way more than a year to get to that point. I just can't see it. Not at all. And I think Frank Warren is really trying to sell us a dream there that is just never going to come to fruition. Not in a year's time. In a couple of years' time, maybe 2.5 years' time, yeah, I could see that, because that gives them time to build to proper level contenders, and then it's a very big domestic clash. Right now, it's a good fight for the fans, for hardcore fans, but really beyond that, how much interest would there be? I just don't know. I don't think enough. What do you make of it all? Can they do it? Can they do 30 or 40,000 seats at the end of next year? Or is that just a bit of a pipe dream? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. That's boxing_squared. I'm out.
If you want even more boxing content, come and join me on Patreon.
Every week on a Sunday, I drop a new video on something topical or thought-provoking from the heavyweight division, ranging from rankings, the business of boxing, the false economy of deluded fanboys, the twists and turns in the division, to assessments of fighters and their statements. I hope to see you there, and for more information go to patreon.com/boxing squared. The address is on screen now.